Let's see. Restream. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Here we are. Let me just make sure. Okay.
Check, check,
Oh,
check, check, check.
yes, we're live. So, welcome everyone to a breaking news session with Markham and myself. The Alberta government has just released a press release about 12:45 Mountain Time today, and it reads: Alberta leads as proponent for West Coast pipeline. Alberta's government acting as proponent will lead a technical advisory group of companies with Indigenous participants to advance a West Coast pipeline application. So, Markham, I'm going to turn it over to you. I want to know your thoughts and some of the details that came out of this press release.
Well, it's not like we didn't anticipate this, right?
Yeah,
I mean, ever since Mark Carney became prime minister in March and began talking about this, Danielle Smith has been pumping this pipeline to the West Coast and an expanded oil sands to fill the pipeline. And she's been doing it for, just nonstop. I mean, I subscribe to the Alberta government's press releases, and it's just like every second press release is about pipelines and LNG and rolling back regulations to enable the LNG in the pipeline. And oh, it's my head hurts after a while.
yeah,
But what she announced today is, I think it's pretty clear. There is no proponent, no pipeline company wants to come forward and propose a pipeline to either Prince Rupert or Kitimat from Edmonton. So then, and they've all said, look, it's too risky. We don't want to do it. And both Enbridge and TC Energy was the proponent for Northern Gateway, right?
right.
Which was a disaster back in 2015, the middle of the last decade, and actually got vetoed by cabinet when the Trudeau government came in. Okay, so they've got a bad taste in their mouth. They spent a lot of money. Enbridge has been watching from afar. It had the Line 3 expansion, which actually did get approved and is now adding another 360,000 barrels a day of shipping capacity. But they've been watching this, and all the fighting and the court challenges and on, and they didn't want any part of it. So the two major pipeline companies that could have come forward and said, yes, we'll put in an application, have both declined. And the other thing is, and this, what they said, which is we would rather deploy our capital in the United States. There's a very good reason for that because the natural gas system there has needed investment for a long time. And with the growth of LNG, particularly in the Texas and Louisiana area, everybody is building pipelines,
Right.
natural gas pipelines, not so much oil
Hmm.
pipelines, but natural gas pipelines. And so I can see where they would say, that's a better use. We think that, oh, and I should, we can't forget Donald Trump. He figures in every conversation about oil and gas. Donald Trump not only has the energy dominance doctrine, he has an energy dominance council. I didn't bet you didn't know this. In the bowels of the White House, someplace, are about a dozen people. And if you're an oil and gas CEO or pipeline CEO or whatever it is, and you've got a problem, you call up the Energy Dominance Council, and you say, "Hey, I'm getting static from, pick a player, an environmental group, a Native American tribe, a state, whatever. I'm
Yeah.
getting static," and that the Energy Dominance Council will then, go beat up on the people that you don't want and clear the way
Unbelievable.
for you to do your project. I mean, it's classic Trump, right?
Hmm.
And the Energy Dominance Council, I've been dying to do a story on it for about a month, and I just can't find time. But anyway, so now cat's out of the bag. Hey, there's an Energy Dominance Council. What does this remind you of? The Major Projects Office?
Yeah,
Doesn't it
no
look a
kidding.
lot like the Major Projects Office, which, Don Farrell heads it up, the former CEO of TransAlta, the former CEO of Trans Mountain Pipeline, and her job is to take these projects and get them across the finish line,
Right.
right? I mean, it's just a Canadian page out of Trump's book. So anyway,
Yes.
uh, what they're doing here is they're going to have an advisory group. They're going to put together, the Alberta government will spend $14 million, and I presume some of the other stakeholders will also put in cash, and they'll do some of the preliminary work on, like, recommending a route. And it won't be a lot of work. 14 million bucks doesn't get you a lot these days, right? If you're hiring an engineering company, to do some of this work, you're not going to get, you have a very, very preliminary work. What Smith is trying to do is create momentum. That's
Right.
what she's trying to do. She's got stakeholders now. She's got three pipeline companies. And maybe, did you read out the pipeline companies, Enbridge and
No,
maybe read,
Southbow, Enbridge, and Trans Mountain, which I mean, I'd like to talk a little bit about why are these the participating companies?
Enbridge is a bit of a head scratcher for me because I would have thought, they declined, publicly declined, and said, we're not going to get involved. Now they're dipping a toe in the water,
Yeah.
to see what the temperature is, right? I mean, there's no real danger for them here. There's no risk. So, okay, they're going to come to the table. Southbow, I don't know Southbow very well. My understanding is it's a medium-sized midstream company, which midstream is transportation of oil and gas.
Okay.
Um, Trans Mountain is the wild card here because Trans Mountain Corporation is a federal crown corporation, right?
Right.
And what happened was, to go back to how it got started, originally Kinder Morgan was the proponent for the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline project. And what happened is the city of Burnaby, which is the terminus of the pipeline, absolutely hated the project. And their mayor at the time and the city harassed the project to no end.
Yeah.
They would drag their feet on permitting. There were protests in the streets, on and on. And the National Energy Board almost always sided with Kinder Morgan. Then in 2017, the NDP get elected, and they go to bat against the pipeline, and it goes to court, and they lose, at the they lose at the I forget what the initial one was, and I think they appealed it, and they lost at they might have even gone to the BC Supreme Court, if I
Yeah.
remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, by the time all the dust settles, and for all of you folks who think that the Trudeau government did not support Kinder Morgan, you could not be more wrong. Because here's the point. Under the National Energy Board Act, which was the name of the regulator at that time, it's now the Canadian Energy Regulator, the federal government transfers, or no, that's not correct. The National Energy Board exercises the constitutional rights of the federal government with respect to linear infrastructure that crosses borders.
Right.
So if you got a pipeline, then it's the regulator who acts on behalf of Canada, regulating the industry and approving and managing the review process and all of that. But there's another point here, and it also has the powers of a superior court. So it can actually render legal judgments. And it did twice. And it upheld the federal government's constitutional right to force a project that crosses borders, provincial borders,
Right.
on BC. So literally, and I did a video about this a couple of months ago, BC cannot legally stop the federal government if it decides that it wants to approve a pipeline or build it. So
Right.
all of that so anyway, Kinder Morgan, we get to about, what was it, 2018, 2019, and Kinder Morgan has had enough. Like, it's just been harassed and bothered. And it's Americans from Houston,
Right.
for starters. They don't like this kind of stuff. And on top of that, they're having debt problems, right? So they're having debt problems. So they say, we're out, and they forced Trudeau's hand. And Trudeau comes in and creates a crown corporation, buys the project for $5.7 billion, which also included existing pipelines, by the way, that were full and generating revenue. And then they build this thing, which comes into operation last year, and it's 24, no, $34 billion. It went from a $5.7 billion project to $34 billion. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. You're building through a
Yes.
pandemic, and they had some sections of it washed out during these, what do they call them, atmospheric rivers, all that kind of. It was just anyway, whatever. So now we get to the point where the federal government, through its Crown Corporation, has built the pipeline. It's operating. It's not fully utilized. It's about 88% is the last number I heard. They want to get up to 96. So it's getting close. What the hell is a federal crown corporation doing as part of this advisory group? I
Well,
mean,
I mean, it to me it sounds like Mark Carney might be involved here somehow. There was some type of deal to bring Trans Mountain in.
the crown corporation does not join an advisory group with the Alberta government and three private enterprises without running up the flagpole with its only shareholder. That is absolutely the case. The Prime Minister's office okayed the participation of Trans Mountain in this advisory group. And that then leads me to the question of, because I've raised the concern that if no private proponent, no private pipeline company will come
Right.
forward, it may be that the federal government says, all right, fine, we'll use Trans Mountain and Corporation and we'll just build it ourselves. So the addition of Trans Mountain Corp into this advisory group sets off the alarm bells ringing. And the reason, folks, if you have not been following my coverage of this, the reason for this is because we think that heavy crude oil exports off the West Coast to Asia, that's the plan here, is incredibly risky,
Right.
incredibly risky. At the moment, the barrels that are going over through Trans Mountain expansion, the existing barrels are going to China. There's about 260,000 barrels a day is what the average is, are being snapped up by these big, giant petrochemical and refinery uh, complexes. I can never remember the name of the company that's entered into a contract already, but they like it because Canadian oil is cheap and its composition, its grade, and other characteristics of it work really well in their complexes.
Right.
Okay, so if you assumed that the market conditions of today were going to be extended out to 2050, you would say, well, okay, why wouldn't we build a pipeline? This is great. The Chinese petrochemical industry really likes our feedstock, and we should do
Yeah.
a lot more. The problem is China is very rapidly electrifying its economy, very
Hmm.
rapidly. Its transportation sector, like, the up to now, 60% of all cars and trucks sold in China have a plug, right? And their auto fleet is rapidly turning over. And by, 2035, it's going to be almost all entirely electric. So unlike the government, which should be doing this work, we went and found some Chinese organizations modeling
Right.
oil demand in China by Chinese entities. So the first one is Sinopec, which is the big state-owned refinery company. The second one is CNPC, which is the state-owned petroleum company, and then
Right.
Peking University. And
Right.
right now, China is buying 17.4 million barrels a day of oil. And Sinopec thinks that by 2050, that number will be 7.5 million barrels a day. So that's a loss of 10. CNPC thinks it'll be 6.5, and Peking University thinks it will be 5.5. So the, the market you're building $30 billion pipeline for is rapidly trying to get off your product.
Right.
They're electrifying and eliminating the demand for your product. And remember, folks, who are the other players in the Chinese oil market? Well, first of all, there's Russia for the light sweet crude
Right.
and a little
Hmm.
bit of heavy, but not much. But on the heavy side, it's Saudi Arabia and Iraq. And they can produce a barrel of heavy crude for like $3, $5,
Really cheap, really cheap.
peanuts, right?
Yeah.
And then we have through TMX right now, our transportation costs per barrel are $18 to get it from Edmonton to a Chinese customer. Their costs are two because they have a port and they put it on these great big VLCC oil tankers.
Right.
And once it's on the water, I mean, it literally costs peanuts to get it over to the customer. So $5 to produce, $2 to transport it there. If they really were nasty and wanted to undercut Canada, they got a lot of room to maneuver where they can say, okay, you know what? We're losing market share over here. We're going to take market share in the petrochemical market and bye bye Canada.
Well,
You
I
know,
want to point this out in the press release. One of the quick facts that they give us, they say additional infrastructure from Alberta's oil sands to BC's coast will ensure Alberta Energy Resources can contribute to meeting significant Asian demand from countries like Japan, Korea, China, and India. So we've talked about China. But what are these other countries they mentioned? Japan, Korea, India. Are they electrifying or is there going to be demand from those countries?
Korea and Japan are very different animals because they are not electrifying as fast as other Asian countries.
Right.
They are considered part of the global north. They're industrialized, they're
Hmm.
sophisticated. So they are generally lumped in with like North America and Europe and Australia and so on. Uh, but they don't have a lot of demand. Like they don't have a lot of refining capacity. I forget what Japan's is, but Korea's heavy crude processing capacity is 350,000 barrels a day. That's
Right.
peanuts.
Yeah.
Like that's half of the capacity of Trans Mountain expansion. That's their whole industry. So if you're relying on Korea as a major customer, mm-mm. India is a different kettle of fish. And they built one great big, refinery petrochemical complex that does this, crude to chemicals conversion that could take Canadian oil.
Yeah.
But it's not that much. I forget what the capacity of it is. But the problem here is that there is a limit. There's already, I don't think we understand this enough, a petrochemical glut. There's way too much capacity in the world, and some of the older, more inefficient units are being retired and mothballed, and there's going to have to be more of it. And so all of this talk about, well, the emerging economies are going to grow and they're going to need stuff and we're going to have petrochemical demand. Where is it?
Right.
We're not seeing it. We're not seeing it now. And there's we're seeing rationalization within the petrochemical industry. So the point of all of this, MC, is not, oh my God, there's no possible way this is going to work. It's the demand is strong between now and 2030. But as Asia electrifies, their consumption of oil will go down starting in the 2030s and starting sooner in China, which
Yeah.
is ahead of everybody. It will go down, and that then creates a significant risk,
Yeah.
a significant risk. And the what you just read is the same language we hear from the industry. The industry says all the time, "Get out of our way, federal government. We want to
There's
realize the
customers.
yeah, we want to realize our full potential of our industry." I'm quoting actually from
Yeah.
one of their letters to the prime minister, which they released publicly. And so they're very, very bullish. The industry is very bullish. But you know what? One of the things, they need a growth narrative because as Ed Hurst, energy economist from the University of Houston, who regularly appears in our interviews,
Yeah.
has said many times, over the last decade, the global oil and gas industry has underperformed relative to other sectors of the economy, like tech, for example. So if you're an investor, you're looking at this and going, well, if you're underperforming, then I want you to give more money back to me. And
Yeah.
so if you want investors to continue giving you capital so that you can grow and you can replace your production and what have you have to have a growth narrative. They will the slower the growth or the lesser the growth narrative. I'm not explaining this very well, but if you don't have a growth narrative, you don't get money. And the weaker your growth narrative, the more that money costs you, right? So
Yeah.
it's in the producer now. Here's a bit of information we just got today. Last week, ATB Financial released its oil and gas survey. And what did it reveal? And we're going to be doing a video on this so folks can I'll explain it in more detail. It said our survey of the oil producers, they are very bullish, very, very bullish. Already mentioned this. Investors are not.
Ah,
Investors are very cautious, and the reason they're cautious is because their assessment of risk is very different than the producers, and it's much higher.
right.
So the folks who think or have a self-interest in this, the producers, are all rah rah, sis boom bah, shake our pound pom poms and let's get going. The people who write the checks are much, much more cautious. And I think that's a lesson for the Canadian government, the Alberta government, and the industry if they were willing to listen. And they're not willing to listen because, as we reported last week, we know for a fact that the federal government is basing its perception of the energy future
Right.
on the IEA's STEP scenario, which is the very much the steady as she goes out to 2050. It's the
Right.
status quo out to 2050. It's not you don't see much of a decline. And then they also review OPEC and ExxonMobil and Shell and all the usual suspects who are very bullish.
Yep.
And they aren't informed by the modeling that's very bearish. So Tim Hodgson comes out. Tim Hodgson's our Minister of Energy, folks. And he comes from Goldman Sachs, where he worked with Mark Carney. And then he joined Mark Carney at the Bank of Canada for a few years. And he sat on Meg Energy's board. He sat on other boards that are related to energy and infrastructure and natural resources. And when you listen to him talk, he puts Danielle Smith to shame, right? I mean, he's that much of an oil and
Yeah.
gas bull. So what we've done is we now have the industry are cheerleaders. The Alberta Premier is a cheerleader. The Alberta Energy Minister, Brian Jean, is just embarrassingly a cheerleader. And
Yes.
then now you've got the Minister of Energy at the federal level, who is a cheerleader, which is very different than Jonathan Wilkinson, who was the last Minister of Energy, who said there is no business case for a pipeline.
Right.
So growth narrative here is a big, big deal. You have to show the industry is moving forward.
So I just want to shout out to a few of our followers who are watching live now. We've got 65 people online, Markham, so that's great. Um, Rod's been making some comments in the comments here on sorry, this is on YouTube, and I just want to bring it back to Neolithic Transit Revolution, who is one of our one of our number one fans. Um, and he's made this comment: I would expect Chinese electrification to mainly reduce lighter barrels used for gasoline, though, and Asia petrochemical demand for heavy to outlast Midwest US demand for fuels. And he's gone on to say that he feels that these are reasonable questions. We can't really, I think what he's getting at here is we can't efficiently predict exactly what the demand's going to be.
Yeah, and there are all sorts of um, X factors.
Right.
So, for instance, Kevin Byrne, who I've been interviewing, he's an energy economist down with S&P Global and an expert on the economics of the oil sands. And I've been interviewing him for like a decade. And he's in the last interview, he said, Markham, I think blending of heavy crude with lighter crudes is going to extend the life of Alberta heavy because Alberta heavy is cheap, right? So
Yeah.
the economics work that you blend it and then you use it in your less sophisticated refineries where you don't need cokers and hydrocrackers, which is what you need when you have heavy crude, and it costs billions of dollars. So how all this will play out is uncertain, but when I think it's a fair guess that when you start to see, if oil demand peaks in 2029, as the IEA has been saying, and then you see a decline begin in the early 2030s. And if the APS scenario plays out and you basically reduce demand by 40 to 45% by 2050, that's a very risky environment. That's a very
Right.
risky market scenario that is not good. And I don't understand the people like Hodgson and Smith who just assume that it will be Canadian oil that will survive. That
Yes.
doesn't that does you can't assume that.
Yep.
You could maybe argue for it. You could say, well, I mean, this is crazy. I have to make their argument for them. Okay, so I'll make the argument for them. The oil sands has very low costs, and we just got the latest from Kevin about 3 months ago, and they now average $27 West Texas Intermediate break even per barrel. Some of
Hmm.
them are as low as 18, some of them are as high as 45, but the average is 27. That's very low. It's not the lowest, but it's still very low.
Right.
And then on top of that, remember that all of their costs and so on are in Canadian dollars and their revenues in American dollars. So that gives them a bit of an
A little
advantage
bump.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And and I mean, plus the heavy crude market is tight because Russia has had sanctions on it, and Iran has had sanctions, and Mexico is in terminal decline, and Venezuela is was uh, prohibited from exporting to the U.S. And then
Right.
Trump reversed that, and then he reversed it again a couple of months later. So now they're banned again. So the supply of heavy crude that Alberta provides is now tight in the U.S. Gulf Coast market. So again, you could argue that given the tightness of the heavy crude and the fact that there are sanctions against some of the heavy crude producers, that bodes well for sure the North
For the
American
oils.
market
Yeah.
because let's I know we all hate Trump now, but remember the Alberta heavy crude is by far the most competitive barrel in the US, which is a 5.5 million barrel a day heavy crude market. Okay. So we now have about 3.5 million barrels of that market. And if we wanted to take the other 2 million barrels, if we put effort into it, presumably we could do that on a price basis.
Right.
We see how complex this gets. There are so many X factors to juggle, and even experts like Kevin will say, well, it's this and this and this, and it all depends, and there's so many caveats but it is caveats make for risk. That's my point.
Well, and I think part of the other point, I mean, Neolithic Trends has brought this up too, is saying, you know, we referred to a managed decline. So like how do we manage the decline of the oil industry? So is it preferable to have a government partner? So I'm like, that must be Trans Mountain. So is that a better thing? We talked about leaving the taxpayers on the hook. What does that look like? But is there an advantage, let's say, to Canadians to having a crown corporation involved in these projects?
Not in this context. Not
Okay.
in this context. Because all the Crown Corporation is simply a replacement for a private corporation. The government is not exercising any uh, um, there's no industrial strategy behind this, right? It's just we can't get a private company involved. So we're going to do it ourselves through Trans Mountain. That would be the conditions on which the government would be involved in this. But we have argued for years now that you could see a strategy of because we argue here that the future of oil is not fuel, it's materials. And we've talked many times about the work at Alberta Innovates that they will have a commercial process in a year or two to turn bitumen into carbon fiber, graphite, and asphalt binder, just as starters. So if you were going to take a strategic approach and you had government involved through crown corporations, they could say, hey, you know what? You guys go over there and you export to the fuels market as long as there's a market. As long as you're competitive, that's great. You could knock yourself out. Just, keep your GHGs down and don't be spilling oil in the Nisga's traditional territory in BC, and we're all good. Meanwhile, the federal government and the provincial government we're going to work over here and we're going to create an advanced materials manufacturing sector that starts with turning bitumen into these three products, which, by the way, make a lot more money than selling it as feedstock to a refinery.
Right.
And we're going to build a domestic market for bitumen, a domestic market. So if you start now and over time you build that domestic market, presumably you could replace a lot of the demand that will be lost from global markets and the American markets, and you can replace it with a domestic market.
Right.
That would be a strategy. That would be a strategic approach to this.
And that's the
And there's
public
no,
welfare kind of strategy.
well, not even that. I mean, remember that the Alberta government owns the intellectual property for that process. So
Right.
this would be more like a Peter Lougheed approach to it.
Right.
We want to change things. We want to make more value and create jobs and attract investment to benefit the people of Alberta. So therefore, we're going to create a crown corporation to advance this technology that
Right.
the private sector it is just not prepared to go ahead with because there's too much risk attached to it.
Right.
So, but my point is, that would be a strategic approach. That is not the direction in which the Alberta government and the federal government are proceeding at this time. Could change, but
At this
not
moment.
so far.
I mean, I think it's very telling the quote from Brian Jean just saying, "We're already see Canada as an energy powerhouse with the right infrastructure, moving towards super powerhouse status is both realistic and achievable." And then at the end of this, he said, supporting the federal government's newly stated ambition of becoming an energy superpower. So he's really, I mean, this looks like Alberta is really trying to, hook on to some of those words that we saw Carney using. Carney has called Canada an energy powerhouse, has used this word over and over again. And in some ways, I guess now we know he was talking about oil and gas, not about other types of energy.
Well, he says so. The phrase is energy superpower, which is absolute,
Right,
folks. I've talked to economists about this. It's absolutely meaningless. On the oil side, Saudi Arabia is an energy superpower because it can move markets. On the gas side, the United States is the biggest LNG exporter. It can move markets. Canada will never move markets. We're never going to be able to withhold supply and change the global price of oil. We're not ever going to be that country. So the energy superpower is just completely meaningless. All it means is we're going to produce more of something, we hope, or they hope. Um, but the problem here is that Carney has been and Hodgson have been so bullish right from the very beginning about
yeah.
oil and creating expectations and meeting with the Alberta government and meeting with the industry in Calgary and appointing Don Farrell as head of the of the major projects office and putting it in Calgary. That's like for if you're talking to investors, that's like a five uh, alarm blaze kind of signal to
Hmm.
investors that this is where our interest is. We're going to oil and gas. So what they've done is they've played this up so much that how do you back down now? Because if
Right.
you back down now, and if you do what some of our viewers are arguing, that this is basically Carney playing 4D chess, and if no proponent comes forward, he'll just shrug and go, "Well, you didn't bring a proponent forward." No, he's raised expectations so high now that shrugging and a pipeline not being built will be perceived as, oh, Canada can't build again. Here we go. The government just couldn't make it happen. They wouldn't roll back
Yes.
C-48 and C-69 and all of the other stuff. And so Carney has painted himself into a corner that he can't get out of. And I'm not even sure, to be honest, that he wants to get out of it. But nevertheless, he is stuck. And the fact, so we cannot say this enough. Danielle Smith is so disliked. Our viewers don't like Danielle Smith. In fact, I don't like Danielle Smith. I think her energy policies are terrible. And I've said so right from 2022. Nevertheless, let us acknowledge that she is a very, very clever strategist and a very clever communicator. And
Yes.
she has helped to paint Carney into that corner by the way she's conducted herself. And now
Hmm.
people, I know all the Albertans who are on are shaking their head going, "No, Markham, she's evil. Don't say that." Don't ever underestimate the enemy. And that is good advice when you're on the battlefield, right?
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, she is so she has maneuvered Carney into this position, along with help from the Carney himself and Hodgson and the rest of the crew. I don't think he can extricate himself without building a pipeline. And the fact that Trans Mountain is part of this advisory group may be a nod by Carney. He's kind of leaving himself an option that if no private company comes forward, it may have to be Trans Mountain, or Trans
Yeah.
Mountain may have to lead a coalition that includes private pipeline companies like Enbridge and South Bow. So we'll see
Definitely.
how that all plays out. But the way it's playing out at the moment looks very much like the way we predicted it would, months
Well,
and
and I
months and
mean, these things are going to play out very, very quickly. The expected application submission to the Federal's Projects Office is going to be in spring of 2026. We're already, I mean, surprisingly, it's the 1st of October today. So, um, we're looking at like 6 months from now, really, that this application will go forward. We're not talking about a huge amount of time here. And, if things are going to be sped up through the major project office, this could happen a lot faster than we think.
the lemmings are stampeding towards the cliff, the edge of the cliff. And the public momentum behind this, the political momentum behind this is very significant. And the way these things work, folks, is that when there's this much momentum, it's a runaway train. It's a herd of stampeding bulls, and those are very hard to turn away. And the only way that any could be do it. First of all, David Eby in BC wants nothing to do with a pipeline across British Columbia. So
Right.
that's going to be one province that will be opposing this. My guess is David Eby can be bought off. I'll be honest. They're going to run a budget deficit this year. They're kind of in financial trouble. They got Crown corporations carrying a ton of debt because they transferred, you know, uh, government debt to the Crowns. So if Carney has the means to dangle enough carrots in front of David Eby to make him change his mind, I don't think that's going to be a game stopper, to be honest with you. So, but the only thing then that's left is public opposition.
Right.
And at this point in the game, Angus Reid just released a poll here last week that showed that 85% or 70, it was a very large number, of a percentage of Canadians think we should do more for oil and gas. They would be supportive of a pipeline. Now, my response to that is, yeah, well, what do they know about oil and gas?
Well, I just want to say to card crazed Froggy here in the comments. Yes, Trans Mountain is the company owned by the feds, and that is what Markham and I are talking about. So thank you for joining us. And Laura Jones is again telling us that we need to play a little wait and see here. Um, has Danielle Smith really painted Carney into a corner? I think she's aiming at there's still a game of 40 chess that maybe we're not seeing yet. And
Can I just jump in here and say
yes,
the problem with that is that by the time you know that you have to act, it's done.
it's too late.
They've done the deal behind closed doors, and all they're doing is holding the press conference to announce what they've already agreed on, and the
Right.
opportunity to stop it or to go in a different direction is completely lost.
Yep.
So I appreciate the fact there are lots of folks out there who like Carney and are willing to trust him to, protect their interests, but that's not our job.
Yes.
Our job as journalists is to look at the evidence and give it to you and hopefully explain it in a way that makes sense. And if that opposes Mark Carney and suggests that he's the one playing checkers, not Danielle Smith, I'm sorry, but that is just the way it is. And you're entitled to your opinion, but based on the evidence in front of us, as we've laid it out today, as a lot of it, it would suggest it would suggest that our view is correct and
And
Carney's
not.
playing checkers.
Well, I mean, it is, I mean, Mike Maxwell has another really great point. He just says, I'm sick of taxes going to the oil companies. And, this is what we're saying is taxpayers are going to be on the hook here at some point, especially if we see Trans Mountain um, at the table in this current application.
You may not know, folks, that there are investment tax credits of federal that of $8 billion that have already been committed to the Pathways Alliance carbon capture and storage project. For that only mitigates or abates 10 to 12% of the oil sands emissions. Now, I interviewed Mark Harmon who was a VP at the Pathways 2, 3 years ago. And he said because uh, their members have said on the record, like Alex Pourbaix from Cenovus Energy when he was CEO,
Hmm.
said it'll cost $75 billion to decarbonize the oil sands, and we expect government to put in 50 billion of it. So already now, and I should mention that Alberta has committed 2 billion. So that's $10 billion are being committed to the carbon capture and storage. Will we see another $40 billion of public money go towards subsidizing that project? And that's only that was 2 or 3 years ago at existing production. If
Right.
you build another pipeline and you have to fill it up with 700,000 barrels a day of new production, do you add another 20% or 30% on top of that? Is it another 10 or 15 billion dollars? And then are there cost overruns, as there always are on mega projects? And it boggles the mind. I mean, this could wind up being a 75 or $100 billion commitment by Canadian taxpayers to an industry that may be declining in the 20s, starting to decline in the 2030s.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So,
mean, we've got Jolene, Jolene in the comments here saying, yes, right on the mark, Mike, saying she doesn't want to give her tax dollars to oil companies. And Laura Jones has come back and just said, Danielle Smith flip-flops all the time. She doesn't hold to anything. So again, not to be trusted is what she's saying.
but this thing is the one thing that she has been consistent on for 3 years.
Mm,
She has not budged an iota. Roll back regulations, build pipelines, expand the oil sands. All
right,
she's done is amplify that megaphone. So no, there are so many wrinkles to this. For instance, the oil sands has about $130 billion of unfunded environmental liabilities
right,
that the
yeah,
government hasn't put up. What happens with those? Are we just going to add to those? And then who pays them when down the road when the company goes bankrupt or whatever? Does the public have to pay them to clean up? there's just this is an onion with a lot of layers. And we've tried to unpack it as best we can in 45 minutes. I promised you, MC, we'd only do this in half an hour. And I think we both knew that was a phony promise. It was never going to be half an hour. But this is so complex
Yep.
that it could go either way. It could go on a lot of ways. And so all we can do is say, here are the trends that we're seeing. Here's what's going on. And based on what we see at the global level,
Yep.
then we think that this is how it's an assessment of how much risk to build a pipeline, expand the oil sands, and expand out into Asia. Well, at this point, based on what the knowledge that we have, it's very risky, in my opinion. And the fact that the investors are thinking the same thing, I think is a point in our favor.
Okay, well, I mean, we are about to wrap up. I do want to just ask you one question. We've been also, there was a big Exxon mobile layoff this week as well. So we're seeing kind of this, there's things happening for oil sands. And I was just wondering, is the pipeline, is building a pipeline going to bring a lot of jobs to Alberta? So is that something that we could look forward to? If there's a silver lining in this at all, you know, are we going to see jobs, middle class paying jobs for working people? What do you think?
Probably not. And we're going to do another live event tomorrow. We were planning today that we would do the Imperial Oil. We were going to provide a global perspective and a
Yep,
technology perspective on why Imperial is doing what it's doing and prospects for the other companies doing the same thing. And then we bumped it over to tomorrow because of the
this
Smith's
announcement.
announcement. But I'll wrap it up this way. Over the last 11 years, beginning in 2014, the employment in Alberta in the oil and gas industry has fallen from 178,000 to 145,000.
Right.
And during that, from 2005 to 2025, oil sands output tripled. So essentially, we're producing an amazing amount more of oil with fewer and fewer and fewer people. And I'm going to argue tomorrow, folks, you want to tune into this because we'll explain why oil companies are shedding employees. And though that trend is going to continue, it's only just getting started in the oil and gas industry. And so I can foresee a future where we put all this public money in to facilitate this, and there are no extra jobs, there are no new jobs created, right? And then on top of that, who are the investors? Who owns these oil companies? Cenovus and Suncor and Imperial.
Right.
It's American investors.
Yep.
They're Canadian based, but they're 70 to 80% owned by investors outside of Canada. Most of them would be Americans. So
Yep.
here we are. The Canadian beneficiary really is governments. And Alberta is the biggest one because it has bitumen royalties and it makes out like a bandit. Like I think last year it got 17 or $24 billion in royalties. So you can see what the motivation is for Smith. But Carney also gets the federal
Yeah.
government through tax revenue also
Right.
gets 3 billion to 6 billion. So if you're Mark Carney and you want to build, build, build and invest, 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 and you don't want to go, print money or go borrow money, facilitating investment in the oil industry, which is then going to give you more tax revenue, is a clever way of paying for what you want to do.
Yep.
So it's important to understand the motivations behind the people here. Is that enough benefit to Canada to justify all the risk and all the investment that will likely have to go in, public money spent on
Yep.
subsidizing these projects? I would argue no.
Yep.
And I think we've laid out a pretty good argument or, to support that claim. So we'll see.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us. The comments have been actually really great for me to read. I'm sorry to those that I didn't get to read out. I also want to say if you like what we're doing here, please support the channel. Buy a membership. You can just click on the join button when you go to our Energy Media channel there on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook. We've got TikTok. We're on LinkedIn. We're almost at all the social media channels. So please follow our content. Comment. I read all the comments. Send me a message. We're going to have more of these live sessions. We're going to do another one coming up right to cover this big Exxon mobile announcement from yesterday. So please join us again, and thanks again.
Thanks, folks. See you tomorrow.
Okay, bye everyone.